Hi everyone, and welcome to our latest video in getting into the detail of how Hodge carefully crafts clients' cases and their individual needs when cases are processed and presented to us from you, the brokers and intermediaries across the mortgage market. My name is James Enos, I'm the National Account Manager, and I'm pleased to be joined by Rob, our Head of Underwriting, and Nurlana, our BDM for the Southeast and London. Today we're really going to get into things in a little bit more detail and help you understand a bit more about how we deal with clients' unique circumstances where we can't put that detail necessarily into our criteria that's published out to the wider audience. We really do look to try and support clients and their individual needs and really get into the detail and the story of their current situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a series of different questions. Rob, I'll ask you from an underwriter's point of view to try and get a real feel for how, when a broker puts a case in, how you and your team deal with that and what you really look at from a point of view of the detail within that case itself. Nurlana, then I'll ask the similar sort of questions, maybe slight variations on how you work with underwriting and how we really help clients work their way through our underwriting process so that we can get the best outcomes and good outcomes for those customers. So Rob, I'm going to ask you first question. So at Hodge, we always seen the incredible value in manual underwriting. I think that's one of the key attributes of the service that we offered. Can you tell us what really makes the difference to brokers and their clients with that service that we offer?
Yeah, I think our manual approach helps us stand out in the market. I think we provide a human touch. I've got a really, really experienced team of experts who understand customer needs. They understand the importance of coming up with good outcomes as well. So they'll take the time and the effort to really understand what the clients want, how we can help. I think it's probably fair to say we've got a fairly shrinking vanilla mortgage market now.
Absolutely.
So I think where we add value as a specialist lender is taking the time and the effort to really understand the proposition and look for ways to approve them.
Yeah, and I think brokers really appreciate that because we're almost going back in time when manual underwriting was more or less the norm within the market. And I think when clients' situations are getting more and more complex, it's very difficult to be able to streamline all those cases accurately through systems and be able to help those customers in the right way and give them different options.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what brokers do, if you look at what financial advisors do, they will spend an awful lot of time with their clients, understanding their circumstances, understanding what they want. And I think it would be remiss of us as a specialist lender not to do exactly the same thing. We've got to really understand who we're dealing with and how we can help them. And if you go to a more automated approach, if you go to a sort of a process which doesn't have that human element, I think you lose that. And I think it's very, very easy then to make the wrong decisions quickly, as opposed to working with brokers, with customers to make sure that you come up with the right outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a broker perspective, Nurlana, what sort of feedback do you get from your brokers when they're sort of dealing with Hodge and they work through cases with them, and you obviously help and hold their hand as well as the underwriting team?
Typically it's really positive feedback. I think it goes back to what you said around manual underwriting and the fact that it's not quite the norm anymore. And I think from the feedback I've had and the cases that I've supported brokers with, they do appreciate the fact that we'll take the time to listen, to understand. It's a bit of that human touch coming into it and just trying to understand how we can support that client as well, because at the end of the day it's more than just the criteria. It's figuring out ways where the case is a strong case, for example, and how we can work it into the proposition, as Rob said, and then basically working with underwriting. I think that communication element is key so that we can understand not only what the broker and the clients need, but then obviously see how we can support it from an underwriter and underwriting and lending perspective as well. So it's definitely well appreciated, and it just helps them, I think, realise that it's not just a one size fits all. It is much more tailored, in terms of, not trying to put that client into a specific box, basically.
No, absolutely. And I think you picked out communication there. I think that's a really key element of the service that we offer at Hodge. From a point of view of examples, Rob, is there any sort of key examples that you think really highlights what makes us stand out from that process point of view?
Yeah, I mean, you could pick from a very long list, to be perfectly honest. I think where we really shine is we can do on one side of things, we can look at barristers who've got really complex income structure and future earnings, and the work that they do today, they may not get paid for it for months and months' time. We can look at that. We understand how that process works. The same if you look at people in the NHS or the world of medicine. So we can look at nurses with bank income as well as the NHS income. We can look at dentists who have private earnings as well as NHS earnings, and then right the way through to I've seen a few social media influencers who are on an upward trajectory earnings wise, but they need somebody to take the time to understand that, to look at it and to come up with a positive decision.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, the social media side, because it's quite a unique role really in today's employment market. I know when I speak about my kids and that's probably one of the jobs that they aspire to be. Most kids are probably in a similar place with that, but I think it illustrates the complexity of the type of business that we deal with and that mortgage companies see now on a regular basis, and how important it is to have a business and an underwriting process that is really flexible, being able to support that. From your perspective, Nurlana, when you're getting an inquiry through, when you're assessing a complex case, how do you see that bigger picture? What do you actually do in working with that broker to then get it, I suppose, presented in the right way so that you can support the underwriting side?
Personally, I like to do a bit of fact finding, which I think we all do in our own way, but I like to fact find a little bit around the case just to understand what the client is trying to achieve ultimately, but also what have we got working for us on that case. So for example, it's what we're seeing a lot of is that it's not just a straightforward income like a one type of income that a client has. It's blended. They might have different pockets of income either from rental or something else that's coming through, or in some cases a self-employed business alongside an employed role, for example. So it's understanding what that all looks like and how those things have really performed, if it's like a self-employed business, like a limited company, and just understanding how I can package it to show underwriting where the strengths are, and just asking those brokers around, what does the last 2 years look like? How are things looking for us now? Because it could be a case of actually those customers have been building for some time and they're in a much better place now, for example. So just kind of getting the bigger picture is always key, and just understanding a little bit more around what's going on for the client, what makes this a strong case, and how we can use those positives to help them support that case further.
I mean, it sounds real common sense really when you sort of talk it through like this, but how important is the carefully crafted case sort of inquiries when they get to you as underwriting? How important is that to you and your team?
I think it's important to everybody involved. I think the more we know up front, the clearer things are, the greater the confidence we can have in our decision, and therefore the client, the broker, can have confidence in that decision as well. So it really helps knowing the ins and outs of the case, understanding the complexities, having it presented in a way where we can, you can pick it up, you can start to understand it, and you can start going through that rationalization process then of coming up with the right decision.
Yeah, and I think from a service point of view, I can imagine if we get that inquiry through early and they touch base with us, we get that communication through the BDM team and through the broker itself to underwriting, it can make that process even smoother.
It's so much easier.
And obviously time is an important factor of processing any mortgage, so that you can get those mortgage offers out. There is going to be a slightly, I suppose, added time period when you've got that manual element, because it needs that. So any early conversation about maybe the complex case can really add weight and add its value.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Nurlana and I speak probably couple of times a week on cases. The same with a lot of my team will speak to BDMs and brokers and everybody else involved in the process on various referrals. And the more we can do up front, the greater that clarity and the quicker then we can progress it through. So absolutely, I think it's very much a question of making sure that those lines of communication are really wide open so that we're able to have that two-way dialogue and make good decisions as quickly in the process as possible.
Great. So I'm going to move it on a little bit to now our sort of values at Hodge, and one of those is trusted expertise. How important do you think that is when you're dealing with brokers and their clients, obviously, and the outside market, on experience, intuition, and having underwriters that really can give confidence to those brokers out there when they're dealing with cases?
I think it's everything. Right. I think it's so pivotal. I think you could have the best systems in the world, you can have slick processes, you can have all of that, but if you don't have the people who really understand not only the proposition that's being presented to you, but also that understanding of how the wider world looks as well. And we talked about social media influencers as an example. That's a little bit of an alien concept to me because I'm not that generation. Yeah. However, I've taken the time to make sure that I kind of understand what happens in that world. Yeah. And the underwriters do exactly the same thing. They understand what goes on out there in the real world, what people really want at various stages in their lives. They understand that certain life events can have impacts upon people either positively or negatively. And being able to navigate a path through that, being able to really get under the skin of that and understand the human element of it, that's where the expertise comes in. And I think that's what we do incredibly well at Hodge. I think we've got a lot of people who take the time to really get a feel for the case, and they will start their thought process as it being, this is a yes, let's make sure that we keep it on that path as well. Yeah. And that's very much our ethos here. So I think it's absolutely massive making sure that we've got that expertise, that flexibility as well. But the other element of that is that trust. Yeah. And we want brokers to have the trust in us that we are making the right decisions for their clients, and I believe that we do that very well.
No, I think you're spot on with that. And from a broker perspective, so when you're dealing out in the field and face-to-face with brokers, how does that come across from a confidence point of view with brokers?
I think it's massive. I think it's really helpful to brokers because a lot of cases that are coming across brokers' desks, I mean, some of them will get a lot of vanilla cases, but there are a lot more complexities, especially with things like social media influencers, for example. You didn't have that role in the same capacity however many years ago. So having the ability to refer cases over and be able to have that open line of communication with underwriting, I think massively boosts confidence for brokers, because then they know they can trust you, and it builds on that, and it shows how knowledgeable we are. And if we need to take it away and consider it, then we'll go and refer it. We'll speak to our internal stakeholders to understand a little bit more about what that looks like. And I think that builds more of a human touch, that sort of they know that we're trying to understand them and support them and find some sort of solution that might work for them, and obviously guide them through that as best as possible, because at the end of the day, sometimes it can be really muddy, and it's better for them to understand if it is going to be a goer or if actually it's not a potential option. But more often than not, the cases that I've found, there's been a way to understand the bigger scenario, what's going on and all the moving elements of it, to really put it together and show them actually, we do understand this in a bit more depth. We haven't just taken an isolated situation, we've looked at it from, we've taken a step back and looked at it from a bigger picture perspective. And I think that massively boosts confidence for brokers.
And how about yourself as well? Because obviously there's got to be an element of confidence when you're going out there and you're talking to the brokers themselves about what type of service you're going to be promoting, and you see on a day-to-day basis from Rob and his team as well.
It's really positive. I mean, I'm quite proud to be able to say I can take cases away and look at it with underwriting. I think it's a really, really unique and, personally a fantastic trait, because it's not always the norm. And that's, no disrespect to other sort of lending firms, but it's not always the norm that you can just take something away. Sometimes it is just a hard no. And it's not to say there aren't going to be situations where that does come into play, but I find that actually we're we have that open-minded nature to go, actually, we can understand this in a little bit more depth and see if we can take a view on it based on what you've told us. And having that transparency with the brokers and that trust is key, because obviously the more we can understand about the case, the more we know. That's brilliant. And it makes me feel much more confident about going out and kind of, finding solutions, problem solving, which I think is really nice to do. And that's kind of the main reason I quite enjoy being a BDM, because I can help them. And it's nice to be able to know that underwriting are, there to support us with that.
Yeah, I think being able to know that you can make a difference within your role, within those parameters, and have that flexibility really does add that extra value, I think, when we're dealing with the more complex cases and that niche area of the market that we serve on a day-to-day basis. I think feeding on to that, it's the feedback and the information that we then get from the brokers and being able to enhance our criteria as well. And we've obviously highlighted some of the criteria enhancements that we brought into our proposition over recent times. We've got now 80% loan to value on interest only on both our Hodge Resi and Hodge Resi Retire products. And how important are those developments and those changes in being able to give your team even more flexibility, and the brokers themselves, who will come on to you now, Nurlana, on what that gives them from a view of Hodge point of view?
The world doesn't stand still. Yeah. So I think it's important that we keep pace with that. We evolve our offering. We make sure that we are offering the right sort of propositions throughout the lifespan of people and their requirements. I think from my perspective, it's quite interesting to see the cases that we get in, and often they will inform the criteria and policy changes that we come up with in the future. Yeah. Because you can see cases that technically fall outside of our current policy, but they're perfectly good cases, and therefore there's an opportunity then for us to start reviewing that and shaping our policy to meet the needs of our brokers and our clients. And I think that's something that we're very, very good at. I think we're getting better and better at that. I will monitor every case that comes in that technically falls outside the policy that we've ended up saying yes to. Yeah. And I use that information then to start shaping the policy and the criteria going forward as well, because what we don't want to do is miss the opportunity to enhance our offering when there's a lot of very, very good cases out there that are a very good risk, but they technically don't tick every box. And I think it's partly my job, and it's the job of my colleagues as well, to make sure that we keep each other honest in terms of that, and we look at whether some of those boxes actually do need ticking or not.
Yeah, and I think, from a broker perspective, when we take the information and we get the feedback, how important it is to their confidence that they're being listened to, and that is sort of feeding through into how we create and develop our propositions.
I think it's really important. I think it shows us as, a lender that does listen, that does take away feedback. And I think that's important, where we're seeing customer behaviours when it comes to lending really changing. We're seeing customers working longer, living longer, and whether it's just because they want to or because they need to. And it's trying to, innovate ourselves as well alongside those customers whose journeys are changing. And, we've seen mortgage terms get longer, all sorts. And I think by trying to offer ways that we can, understand those customer circumstances in a bit more depth and, adapt with them, I think that, is a really positive thing to be able to do, because you're not just standing still, like you were saying, we're moving along with them and actually trying to support them along that journey that is constantly changing. So to be able to make criteria changes such as this, I think it's fantastic, because it's just unique. It's sort of stepping out of the norm and thinking of ways that we can offer more flexibilities and expand things like affordability for those clients that, they don't fit that standard box that we had 5-10 years ago, and, it's moving along with them on that journey.
Yeah, and I think the combination of criteria is always what comes out in conversations when we're out in the field. It's not necessarily one criteria itself, it's a number of different areas, and that breadth and flexibility across our proposition that helps us stand out, I suppose, from the other 100+ lenders that we see out in the market. So I think all that baked in and added in really does set us aside from maybe other lenders who serve customers in a similar way, but haven't necessarily got that access and flexibility to the people who are making the decisions within the business. I'm going to move it on a little bit now to how much, I suppose, the team from a sales point of view does within the market. We do well over, I think it's over 80 different events throughout the year, and we also then do a lot of teams and face-to-face presentations within meetings. Now, I think it's a challenge for Hodge always to be able to get the message out of how flexible we really can be. We always set out our proposition within criteria sites so that brokers can get a guide of that. But how important is it through those different events and activities to be able to really get that message out to brokers so that they understand how flexible Hodge can be, and how that we're really interested in hearing that story, that customer, and supporting, as Rob's already said, with a yes first on as many occasions as we possibly can.
I think things like that enable us to collaborate with advisors on another level. It's one thing being able to pick up the phone and raise stuff over, have Teams meetings and things. They're great, but it doesn't really, replace that face-to-face. And I think when you're in that sort of environment, you've got criteria and ideas all bouncing around, and to be able to actually just sit down with your BDM and just ask them those questions or raise those cases, I think that's really effective. I mean, even from like being on the other side and being in those events and talking to brokers or presenting, being able to use real life examples goes a long way, and being able to have that discussion where there's the back and forth. It's not just a yes no, it's a tell me more about it, and they have you there face to face, and they can run through a few different scenarios. Like you said, it's not just one criteria, it's a combination. And I think it's important because that gives them that sort of doorway, that sort of welcome into Hodge, to understand a bit more about how we as a lender are as well. It's that kind of, we're willing to listen, we want to understand a bit more, we're open to hearing what you've got to say. Let's see what, whether we can support you there. And I think that helps us achieve that.
And I think it's consistency in that unique DNA that we have, from having that right out in the field and what the brokers see on a day-to-day basis from the sales team, and obviously then seeing that mirrored within the actions and the conversations that they have with the underwriting team as well. I mean, from your perspective, Rob, how do you think from, it works with the underwriting team and their passion and ability to be able to make decisions that they think are common sense and the right thing to do for a customer?
I mean, I think it's really important that everybody feels empowered to make those decisions, and my team certainly do. There's regular communication that we have to make sure that people are applying the right level of risk appetite. I think also, if you're looking on an external basis, coming back to some of Nurlana's points there, we'll support by attending broker events or support webinars, or speaking to brokers directly, and I think that's really important as well. I think the job of an underwriter isn't just to apply policy and criteria, it's about building those relationships and really starting to understand, again, I keep coming back to it, that human element.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you can do that if all you're going to do is look at policy documents and that's it. I think you've got to have those conversations. I think you've got to have that back and forth and hear other points of view, hear what other people are saying, so that you can get that sort of fully rounded understanding of what you're being presented. So I really do encourage my team, and I do it myself, to support you guys as well, to make sure that we're building that rapport, we're building that trust, we're building those relationships with brokers and subsequently their clients as well. And I think that helps people feel really empowered to make those decisions.
And I think we shouldn't take that for granted. That is quite unique. That is unique. That is something that Hodge prides itself on. And as we are today, is trying to get that message out to really help brokers understand what they should expect to find. Those who use us already will know it, but those who don't use us can obviously get in touch with us and then get that experience when they do have those cases that they need that support with. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with a final question here. Is can you sum up in one line what Hodge itself, the Hodge difference, really means to brokers?
I think for me, it's probably making complex cases much simpler. Complex cases are not so complex for us. It's not, that's not just one sentence.
Typical sales, typical sales, yeah.
We'll understand it,
Yeah.
ask us the question, and we'll look to understand it, we'll try our best, and it's making that complex case, that complex journey, a lot easier to understand, and working through it with them, to support them and their client.
Excellent. And for you, Rob?
If it's a one line, I suppose we understand that everybody has different needs, different circumstances, and we're here to help as many people as possible.
Excellent. So I think that's a good place for us to be able to wrap up today. Hopefully we've achieved what we were looking to really do for you, the brokers, today, and give you a better understanding of how important to Hodge it is to understand that customer story and be able to support them with their needs, and navigate the application process, and support you with the flexible philosophy that we've got within our criteria itself. So, thanks again to Rob and Nurlana for joining us and going through the questions. And we look forward to bringing out our next video and giving you further updates in the future.